Elijah Carter, a successful black CEO, returns to his hometown of Newbridge to build a community center, only to face intense opposition rooted in systemic racism and corruption. His efforts are sabotaged by Officer Daniels, who fabricates criminal allegations and manipulates crime statistics to discredit Elijah and halt the project. As Elijah confronts the deeply ingrained prejudice and abuse of power, he is unjustly arrested and humiliated. The town's leaders and the police work to undermine him, reflecting the pervasive racial biases that plague the community, leaving Elijah to fight for justice and accountability against powerful, entrenched forces. Elijah Carter adjusted his wristwatch, an old, worn piece he had inherited from his father, as he stepped out of his unassuming car and onto the bustling streets of Newbridge, a quaint town that seemed untouched by time. Despite being the CEO of a thriving tech company, Elijah preferred simplicity, a testament to his roots in this small community. His car, a modest sedan, stood out among the luxury vehicles typically lined along the town's historic Main Street. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and well-worn jeans, Elijah's appearance belied his status. As he walked, his gaze swept across the familiar facades of small businesses and cozy diners, each holding memories of his youth. He was not just a visitor. He was a pillar of this community, having invested in local initiatives and education programs. Yet, for all his contributions, his return to Newbridge always brought a blend of warmth and underlying tension. The setting was picturesque, with the sun casting golden hues over the brick buildings and the autumn leaves fluttering lightly to the ground. It was early Saturday morning, and the town was already alive with the sounds of morning chatter and the clinking of coffee cups at the local diner, Rosie's Place. Elijah pushed open the door to Rosie's, the bell chiming overhead announcing his entry. The diner, a fixture in Newbridge for over 40 years, boasted red vinyl booths, checkered flooring, and the aroma of fresh coffee and bacon. It was a place where everyone was meant to feel welcome, yet Elijah often felt the weight of unspoken words and lingering stares. As he took a seat at the counter, the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Donna, approached with a warm smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Morning, Elijah. The usual?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight wariness that had become all too familiar. "Yes, thank you, Donna," Elijah replied, offering a polite nod. He noticed a couple at a nearby booth pause their conversation to look his way, curiosity mixed with faint recognition in their eyes. While Donna went to pour his coffee, Elijah's attention was caught by the television mounted on the wall, broadcasting a news segment about economic disparities in urban areas, a topic close to his heart. He was deeply involved in initiatives aimed at bridging these gaps, often advocating for technology access and educational reform. Lost in thought, he didn't immediately notice a young couple enter the diner. They hesitated at the door, scanning the room before their eyes settled on him. The man whispered something to his companion, a frown forming as he looked back at Elijah. "Donna, who's that?" he asked, not quite discreetly, nodding towards Elijah. "That's Elijah Carter, owns that big tech company up in the city," Donna replied, her tone neutral, but her words carrying a weight that suddenly charged the air. "Oh, a big shot, huh? Doesn't look it," the man scoffed quietly, his words intended for his companion, but loud enough for Elijah to hear. Elijah sipped his coffee, the bitter taste lingering as he set down the cup. He was accustomed to being underestimated or misjudged, often mistaken for someone less significant than he was. This disconnect between his real influence and public perception was a constant reminder of the barriers that still existed, invisible yet palpable. As Donna returned with his breakfast, Elijah offered a grateful smile. "How's the family, Donna?" he inquired, shifting the focus from himself to her, a move he knew helped bridge the gap between his world and the town. "They're good, Elijah, busy as always," she answered, her demeanor softening as she spoke of her grandchildren. Elijah ate quietly, observing the patrons. His presence was a ripple in the pond of their morning routine, subtle yet disruptive. He reflected on the irony of his situation. Here he was, a titan in the tech industry. Yet in the eyes of some, he was an anomaly, an outsider, despite his roots. After finishing his meal, Elijah left a generous tip on the counter and prepared to leave. As he stood, the same man who had commented earlier approached him, a challenging look in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, right heard. You're pretty successful, must be nice," Forgetting where you come from, huh? The man said, his voice laced with a mix of accusation and envy. Elijah turned to face him, his expression calm. On the contrary, he replied, his tone even. I remember exactly where I come from, it's why I come back, it's why I try to make things better. Success isn't just for me, it's for the community too. The man paused, taken aback by Elijah's response, his aggressive posture softening slightly. Elijah continued, We all have more in common than you might think. Maybe over coffee, we can discuss how my company can benefit more folks around here. Taken by surprise, the man nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. Elijah smiled genuinely and stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind an impression that would simmer throughout the diner long after he had gone. As he walked down Main Street, his thoughts turned towards his next project, a community center for Newbridge, aimed at providing technology training and resources. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and misconceptions, but he was ready to face them head-on, armed with patience and the determination to bridge the divide. In this small town, where every action was scrutinized, Elijah's journey was not just about innovation, but about redefining the essence of community and belonging. He was ready to take on the subtle prejudices, one small victory at a time, changing perceptions through persistent presence and unwavering commitment. As Elijah stepped out of Rosie's diner, the crisp autumn air did little to cool the heat of the encounter that had just transpired. The man's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the barriers that often went unseen but were felt deeply. Elijah's resolve to foster change within his community was firm. Yet these moments underscored the persistent undertow of resistance he had to navigate. Walking down Main Street, Elijah planned his next moves for the community center project. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp wail of a police siren, a sound that typically signaled urgency and trouble. He turned to see a police cruiser pull up beside him. The door swung open and out stepped Officer Brad Miller, a man whose reputation for being tough on outsiders was well known in the community. Elijah Carter, Officer Miller called out as he approached, his tone more accusatory than inquisitive. Yes, that's me. Something I can help with, officer? Elijah responded, his voice calm, maintaining the professional demeanor he was known for. We've had some complaints about disturbances in the area. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? The officer asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked Elijah over, taking in his casual attire, which seemed to fuel his suspicions. I've just had breakfast, officer. I haven't seen or caused any disturbances, Elijah replied. His tone still even, but inside, his frustration began to simmer. It was not the first time he had been unfairly scrutinized, and it likely wouldn't be the last. Mind if I check your ID? The officer demanded, extending his hand expectantly. Elijah complied, handing over his driver's license. As he did, he couldn't help but feel the sting of indignity that came with such requests. He watched as Officer Miller scrutinized the ID, looking for something, anything, that might justify this stop. Looks like you're clear. Just keep out of trouble, the officer finally said, handing back the ID with a reluctance that suggested disappointment at not having found a reason to escalate the encounter. Thank you, officer, I always do, Elijah responded, reclaiming his ID with a nod. He watched as the cruiser drove off, the officer giving him one last scrutinizing look before disappearing down the street. Shaking off the encounter, Elijah continued his walk, reflecting on the relentless undercurrent of bias that threaded through even the most mundane interactions. It wasn't just the overt discrimination that wore at him, it was the accumulation of these small, cutting interactions, each one a reminder of the unspoken boundaries that still existed in some minds. As he approached the site where the community center was to be built, he saw a small group gathered. He recognized a few local business owners among them, including Linda Hayes, the owner of the bookstore across from the site. As he joined the group, the conversation paused momentarily, the atmosphere charged with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Elijah, glad you could make it, Linda said, her voice cordial but cautious. Some folks are worried about what this project means for the neighborhood. They're concerned about the changes it might bring. Elijah listened as they voiced their concerns about increased traffic, about the types of programs the center would offer, about the impact on property values. Behind these legitimate concerns, however, Elijah sensed a deeper resistance, one rooted in who he was and what he represented to them, an outsider, despite his deep local roots. "I understand your concerns," Elijah began, addressing each point with patience and clarity. "But this center is about providing opportunities, educational programs, tech access, job training, that benefit everyone, boosting the whole community." As he spoke, he noticed the couple from the diner standing at the back of the crowd, their expressions mixed with curiosity and a hint of the earlier disdain. He addressed them directly, hoping to bridge the gap. "This is about helping our youth, about preparing them for the future. We have a chance to lead by example, to show them what we can achieve together." The group listened, and while some nodded in tentative agreement, others remained unconvinced, their faces closed and unreadable. The meeting ended with promises of further discussions, but as the crowd dispersed, the weight of the unspoken judgments lingered in the air. Elijah felt the strain of the morning's events as he walked back to his car. The encounter at the diner, the stop by the police, the skepticism at the meeting. It all compounded into a palpable sense of isolation. Despite his success and his intentions, he was still seen as an outsider, his every action scrutinized and doubted. He sat in his car, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. The path ahead was clear, but fraught with challenges. He knew he couldn't waver, that his role as a leader was not just about advancing his own projects, but about challenging the prejudices that still held sway in corners of his community. Determined, Elijah started the engine and drove towards the city. He needed to gather more support, to rally his allies. The project would go ahead, but it would require all his resilience and strategic acumen to overcome the barriers that had manifested so clearly today. As the town of Newbridge faded in his rearview mirror, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just building a community center, he was fighting to reshape the fabric of the community itself, to weave a new narrative of inclusion and opportunity. This was more than a project. It was a testament to his commitment to change, one small victory at a time. With each mile that passed, Elijah's resolve hardened. He would return, ready to engage, to discuss, and to demonstrate the value of his vision. He would not be deterred by the prejudices that shadowed his steps. Instead, he would use them as the impetus to push forward, to prove that change was not only necessary, but possible. The road ahead would be long, and the battles would be hard-fought, but Elijah Carter was no stranger to adversity. He would meet each challenge with the same calm determination that had brought him this far, forging paths where none existed, for the betterment of all who called Newbridge home. As Elijah drove back towards Newbridge a few days later, the sunlight was fading, casting long shadows across the road. His mind raced with plans and countermeasures for the community center, but more so, with how he could address the underlying currents of bias that ran through his encounters. He knew this visit could be pivotal. He needed to secure a commitment from local leaders to publicly support the initiative. Arriving at the town hall for a scheduled meeting with city council members, Elijah noticed more police presence than usual. An unsettled feeling grew inside him, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As he entered the hall, he caught snippets of hushed, tense conversations, a sign that news of his project and its mixed reception had reached the ears of the town's power players. Mitchell, a council member who had shown tentative support, approached him with a concerned look. "Elijah, glad you're here. There's been a lot of chatter about your plans, and not all positive. Watch your back tonight," he murmured, before moving off to greet another attendee. Elijah nodded, thanking him for the warning, and prepared his notes. As the meeting commenced, it was clear the room was divided. He presented his vision for the community center, detailing the benefits it would bring to local education and economy, and the partnerships he had secured to offer top-tier resources. His presentation was met with a mix of applause and skeptical murmurings. However, the air changed when Officer Brad Miller stood up during the QA session, holding a folder Elijah had not noticed before. "Mr. Carter, can you explain why there are reports of increased crime rates in areas where your other centers have been established? Isn't this a risk to our community?" he asked, his voice loud and carrying across the room. Elijah was taken aback. "Officer Miller, I believe there's a misunderstanding. The data actually shows that community engagement increases in those areas, and petty crimes decrease over time. Can I see the reports you're referring to?" Miller flipped open the folder, distributing copies to the council members, The reports were clearly manipulated, showing skewed statistics. Murmurs grew into open debates among the audience. Elijah stood firm, addressing each point, but the seeds of doubt were sown. As the meeting wrapped up, the council was undecided, opting to delay their decision. Frustrated but not defeated, Elijah stepped outside for air, only to be greeted by flashing police lights. "Elijah Carter, we need to talk," Officer Daniels, a higher-ranking official than Miller, said as he approached. Elijah noticed a camera crew from the local news station setting up nearby. It seemed someone had tipped them off. "What's this about, Officer Daniels?" "We've received a tip about fraudulent activities tied to your funders. We need to investigate this, starting with your documents and correspondences." Daniels's tone was accusatory, his eyes hard. "This is absurd," Elijah protested. "My funding is completely legitimate. I can provide all necessary documentation." "We'll need to take you in for questioning. It's procedure," Daniels insisted, gesturing to two officers to come forward. The camera's red light went live, capturing every moment as Elijah was escorted to the police cruiser. The humiliation of the arrest, under the watchful eyes of Newbridge and its whispering onlookers, was overwhelming. At the station, Elijah sat in a stark interrogation room, his mind racing. The documents they were questioning were sound, his projects were transparent, yet here he was, caught in a whirlwind of allegations and media spectacle. After what felt like hours, Daniels returned with a smug look. "Looks like everything checks out, Mr. Carter." "You're free to go for now," Daniels declared, his voice implying the temporary nature of his freedom. Elijah, though relieved, felt a surge of anger. "This isn't over, officer. You've used your position to harass me without cause. I expect accountability." Daniels shrugged, unconcerned. "Just doing my job, ensuring the safety of our community." As Elijah left the station, he knew this was a critical moment, not just for his project, but for his very standing in the community. The news of his arrest would spread quickly, and he needed to control the narrative. He called Mitchell, asking for support, and reached out to the local news station to arrange an interview. He needed to expose the bias and manipulation he faced, not just for his sake, but for anyone who might endure similar treatment in Newbridge. As he prepared for the interview, his resolve hardened. Tomorrow, he would fight back on a public stage, ready to clear his name and advocate for his project. The sun had set completely by the time he reached his hotel, the darkness echoing his mood. Tomorrow's confrontation would be decisive, and as he rehearsed his points for the upcoming interview, Elijah felt a mix of dread and determination. This was more than a personal battle. It was a stand against a system that too often judged by assumptions rather than facts. As he finally drifted into a restless sleep, his last thought was a promise to himself and his community. This is not the end. It's just the beginning. The cold, hard bench of the Newbridge police station was a far cry from the warmth and comfort of Elijah Carter's usual surroundings. His mind raced as he waited in the dimly lit hallway, the echo of his own thoughts as loud as the footsteps of officers patrolling the station. The accusations levied against him were baseless, a fabrication woven with the threads of prejudice and fear that had shadowed his every step since announcing his plans for the community center. Elijah's hands clenched and unclenched as he thought about the day's events. The council meeting, the unexpected confrontation with Officer Daniels, and the humiliating spectacle of his arrest. It was clear that some in Newbridge saw his initiatives, his very presence, as a threat to the status quo. But as the night dragged on, his frustration brewed into a resolute determination. This was not just his fight anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the town. Mitchell had promised to help, a beacon of support in a sea of adversity. He had witnessed the arrest and immediately reached out to his contacts in the media, urging them to look into the questionable motives behind the police action. As Elijah was released from the temporary hold, he was greeted not by the cold night air he expected, but by the bright lights of camera crews, their lenses pointed directly at him. "Mr. Carter, can you tell us what happened?" a reporter shouted above the murmur of the crowd. Elijah paused, gathering his thoughts. "Tonight, I was detained without just cause," he began, his voice steady despite the churn of anger and disappointment inside him. "But this isn't just about me. It's about what kind of community we want to be. Are we a place that values truth and justice, or one that succumbs to baseless fear and prejudice?" The crowd was a mix of supporters and skeptics, their faces illuminated by the harsh television lights. Among them, Elijah spotted Officer Daniels, his expression unreadable in the shadowy backdrop. The officer's presence was a silent challenge, a reminder of the institutional barriers Elijah was determined to overcome. As the impromptu press conference continued, Elijah laid out the facts. His funding was legitimate, his project successful and beneficial. Yet, he had been targeted, his character questioned, all because he dared to bring change to Newbridge. Back at his hotel, Elijah's phone was a constant buzz of notifications, messages of support, legal advice offers, and more media requests. Among them was a message from Mitchell, confirming that a special council meeting had been scheduled for the next day to address the incident. It was a small victory, but a critical one. That night, Elijah barely slept. The hotel room, usually a place of rest and solace, felt more like a battleground. His mind was a whirlwind of strategies and speeches, each word a soldier in the upcoming fight for justice and understanding. Morning came with a grim gray sky, reflecting the turmoil within Elijah as he prepared for the day ahead. Dressed in a sharp suit, the physical armor barely concealed the resolve that fortified him internally. He was ready to confront those who sought to undermine him, to expose the systemic corruption that had reared its ugly head. The council chamber was packed when Elijah arrived, the air thick with anticipation and tension. The council members, including Mitchell, sat in a semicircle, their faces a mosaic of concern, curiosity, and in some cases, contempt. As the meeting commenced, Elijah listened intently as various members spoke. Some expressed genuine concern about the implications of his arrest. Others veiled their skepticism with legal jargon and procedural questions. When it was his turn to speak, Elijah rose, his presence commanding the room. "This project is not just a building, it's a beacon of hope for our community," Elijah stated, his voice resonant, carrying across the chamber. "Yet, we are here today not just to discuss brick and mortar, but the very foundations of our community: justice, equality, and respect." He turned slightly, his gaze locking with Officer Daniels, who sat in the audience. "Last night, I was detained on trumped-up charges, an act intended to intimidate and silence me. But I stand before you not just unbroken, but unbowing." The chamber erupted in murmurs, the council members exchanging glances, the weight of Elijah's words settling over them. Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence waning under the scrutiny of the public eye. "I asked the council to not only support this project, but to launch an investigation into the actions of the police last night," Elijah continued, his request bold and direct. "We must ensure that our town is a place where justice prevails over prejudice, where truth trumps fear." Mitchell was the first to respond, his voice firm. "Elijah is right. We need to look into this matter deeply and ensure that our town upholds its values." The debate that followed was intense, with arguments flaring and subsiding like the tempest outside. As the meeting drew to a close, the council voted in favor of both the community center and the investigation, a dual victory that felt both sweet and sour to Elijah. As the crowd dispersed, Elijah felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mitchell, his eyes conveying a mix of admiration and concern. "You did well today, Elijah. But be careful. This isn't over yet." Elijah nodded, the reality of his friend's words settling in. "I know, but it's a start." Leaving the chamber, Elijah felt the weight of the day's events. He had stood up against a tide of injustice, his resolve unyielding. Yet, as he walked out into the gathering storm, he knew that the real battle was just beginning. The clouds above mirrored the darkness that still lingered in the corners of Newbridge. But like the impending rain, Elijah was ready to cleanse the town of its hidden malaise. This confrontation was not the end, but rather the prelude to a greater challenge. As he drove away from the town hall, the first drops of rain began to fall, each one a promise of the cleansing and renewal that was yet to come. The relentless rain poured down, mirroring the tumultuous emotions that churned within Elijah as he drove toward the town hall for what he knew would be the most critical confrontation of his professional life. Each droplet that splattered against the windshield seemed to echo the accusations and lies that had been hurled against him in the previous days. Inside the town hall, the atmosphere was electric, charged with tension and anticipation. Elijah's steps echoed through the corridors, his heart pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from a resolute determination to reclaim his integrity and to shine a light on the dark corners of prejudice that had tried to undermine him. As he entered the council chamber, he saw that it was filled to capacity. The citizens of Newbridge, a mix of supporters and skeptics, filled the room, their murmured conversations creating a low buzz that felt like the rumbling of a distant storm. At the front, sitting with an air of forced calm, was Officer Daniels, the man who had become the face of the opposition against Elijah's community center project. Elijah's gaze locked on Daniels as he made his way to the front of the room. The murmurs quieted as he took his place at the podium, his presence commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice clear and resonant, "we are here tonight not just to discuss a building project, but to confront the very principles upon which our community stands." He paused, letting his words sink in before turning his attention directly to Officer Daniels. "Officer Daniels has raised concerns about my project, questioning its integrity and my motives. Tonight, I want to address those concerns head-on." Daniels, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by a guarded caution, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. Elijah continued, "We have all seen the reports circulated by Officer Daniels' reports that supposedly link my projects to increases in crime." He held up a sheaf of papers, the same reports that Daniels had distributed. "I have conducted an independent audit of these claims, and what we found was not only an absence of evidence, but a deliberate manipulation of data." A collective gasp filled the room as Elijah's words hung in the air. He handed the papers to a council member, who began to pass them around. "Furthermore," Elijah pressed on, his eyes never leaving Daniels, "we have evidence to suggest that these manipulations were not just errors, they were intentional acts designed to foster fear and resist change." Daniels stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd," he blurted out, his voice betraying a hint of panic. "You have no proof." "Actually, we do," Elijah replied calmly. From his folder, he produced emails and documents, direct communications between Daniels and certain individuals who stood to lose from the community center's success. These were obtained legally, with a warrant, and they show a clear pattern of misconduct. Daniels' face turned a shade paler as the documents circulated. Whispers turned into clamorous discussions as the evidence of his actions became undeniable. Elijah, seizing the moment, addressed the room. "This is not just about a community center. This is about whether we are a community that values truth and justice over fear and prejudice. We must decide what kind of community we want to be." The room erupted into chaos, with some people shouting in anger and others in support of Elijah. Amidst the uproar, Mitchell, who had been silent up to this point, stood and called for order. "We need to discuss this evidence thoroughly and decide on our actions." As the council members whispered among themselves, Daniels knew his position was untenable. He had been exposed, his motivations laid bare before the community he had vowed to serve. With a resigned sigh, he gathered his belongings and left the room. His exit met with a mixture of jeers and stunned silence. Elijah watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a sobering sense of responsibility. He turned back to the community, his voice softer now, more reflective. "Change is never easy," he said. "It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about our society, but it is necessary if we are to grow and improve as a community." As the meeting adjourned, the council agreed to reconvene to discuss the future of the community center. Elijah felt a cautious optimism, but he knew that the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. He stepped outside, the rain having stopped, leaving the air fresh and a sense of renewal lingering. As he looked up at the clearing sky, Elijah felt the weight of the evening's confrontation and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Despite the victory of exposing Daniels' actions, the community was still divided, and the project's future remained uncertain. Elijah knew that tonight's events were just the beginning. The real work, the healing and rebuilding, was yet to come. As he drove away from the town hall, the streets of Newbridge quiet and reflective under the night sky, he pondered the pivotal decision he had to make: whether to push forward with the community center in the face of potential continued resistance, or to find a new path to bring about the change he envisioned for his community. This unresolved moment left Elijah and the town of Newbridge at a crossroads, one that would define the very soul of their community in the days to come. As the early morning mist dissipated over the town of Newbridge, Elijah Carter stood outside the town hall, mentally rehearsing his imminent confrontation. Today, he would face Officer Daniels, the embodiment of the systemic bias that had tried to derail his community center project and, by extension, his very integrity. The town hall's main auditorium was packed with residents, the atmosphere thick with tension and anticipation. The stage was set for a showdown that would not only determine the future of Elijah's community center, but also potentially expose the deep-seated prejudices affecting their community governance. Elijah entered the auditorium, his presence commanding immediate attention. The murmurs hushed as he walked down the aisle toward the front where Officer Daniels stood, his posture rigid, betraying a hint of unease. Elijah's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Daniels's visible discomfort. The mayor of Newbridge, seeing both parties in place, called the meeting to order. "This session will now begin, Mr. Carter. You have the floor." Elijah nodded, took a deep breath and began. "Thank you, Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen of Newbridge, we are gathered here not just over a dispute about a building project, but over the values that will define our community." Turning to face Officer Daniels directly, Elijah continued. "Officer Daniels has raised concerns about my project, citing supposed risks and improprieties. Today I present not just my defense, but also evidence of a troubling pattern of behavior from Officer Daniels that suggests his actions are not in the best interests of this community." Daniels frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he prepared to defend his actions. However, Elijah was not finished. From his briefcase, he pulled out a series of documents and laid them out for everyone to see. These documents, obtained legally, include communications between Officer Daniels and certain developers who stand to benefit financially from blocking my project. There is also evidence of Officer Daniels manipulating crime statistics to stoke fear and resistance against the community center. Gasps and murmurs broke out among the audience as the documents were passed around. Daniels' face flushed red, his eyes darting around the room, looking for any ally. Elijah, seizing the moment, pressed on. "Furthermore, I have here testimonials from several community members who have felt intimidated by Officer Daniels in their dealings related to this project." As Elijah spoke, individuals from the crowd stood up, bolstering his claims with their own experiences. The room grew increasingly charged, the community's unrest palpable. Daniels, now on the defensive, took the microphone. "These accusations are baseless. I have served this community for over 2 decades, with nothing but its best interests at heart." But Elijah was ready for this retort. "Respectfully, Officer Daniels, your service is appreciated, but it does not excuse the actions you've taken to undermine a project that has broad community support and benefits. Your actions have not been those of protection, but of obstruction." The mayor intervened, sensing the need to calm the escalating tension. "We will have a recess and reconvene in 15 minutes. I urge everyone to remain calm and respectful." During the recess, whispers filled the hall, with many expressing shock and disappointment in Daniels. Others remained skeptical, their trust in Elijah's revelations not quite settled. When the session resumed, the mayor announced that there would be an investigation into the allegations against Daniels, and until the findings were confirmed, Daniels would be suspended from any duties that might influence the community center project. Daniels, realizing the gravity of the situation, stood up, his voice tinged with desperation. "I have always acted in what I believed was the best interest of this town. I see, now, that I may have been mistaken in my methods." Elijah watched Daniels leave the hall, his exit marked by a mix of relief and profound disappointment among the attendees. Turning back to the community, Elijah addressed the crowd once more. "Today's revelations are difficult for all of us. They remind us that vigilance is necessary to guard against the misuse of power. I propose that we not only move forward with the community center, but also establish a committee to oversee its development, ensuring transparency and accountability in all our community projects." The crowd responded with cautious applause, many still processing the events they had witnessed. As the meeting adjourned, Elijah felt a mixture of victory and the heavy responsibility of the tasks ahead. He had exposed deep-seated corruption, but the path to healing and rebuilding trust within the community would be a long one. As Elijah stepped out of the town hall into the crisp morning air, the unresolved future of Newbridge lay before him. The community center would likely proceed, but how the town would reconcile with the day's revelations remained an open question. Elijah knew his work was far from over, and as he walked back to his car, he was prepared for the challenges that lay ahead in rebuilding the trust and unity of Newbridge. This moment of victory was tinged with the knowledge that true resolution would require more than just winning a confrontation. It would require continuous effort and engagement to ensure that Newbridge emerged stronger and more united from the ordeal. The Newbridge Town Hall had never seen an assembly as large and emotionally charged as the one that convened a few weeks after Officer Daniels' suspension. The revelations of the previous meeting had sent shockwaves through the community, initiating a period of intense reflection and debate about the future of their town and the governance that would lead them forward. Elijah Carter stood before the town once again, not as a defendant against spurious charges, but as a leader who had weathered a significant storm. As he looked out over the crowd, he saw faces marked by a range of emotions, from relief and hope to lingering skepticism and concern. "Good evening," Elijah began, his voice resonant in the quiet hall. "We are here to affirm our commitment to transparency, justice, and progress in Newbridge. The actions taken in recent weeks were difficult, but necessary. We have seen what can happen when unchecked power is allowed to influence our decisions and our lives." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "However, it is not enough to remove a single source of corruption. We must ensure that our entire system is robust against such vulnerabilities in the future." To the nodding of many heads, Elijah unveiled his proposal for a new community oversight committee, comprised of members elected by the town's residents, which would oversee not only the community center project, but also other municipal initiatives. This committee would ensure that all actions taken would have the oversight and input of the community they were meant to serve. As Elijah outlined his vision, it was clear that the town was with him. Applause broke out several times during his speech, a stark contrast to the fraught silences of the previous meetings. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels had not been idle. His suspension had given him time to reflect on his actions and the revelations brought to light. In a surprising turn, Daniels chose to resign from the Newbridge police force, a decision he announced in a brief, subdued statement to the press. "I have come to realize that my actions, though intended to protect our community, were misguided. I hope that my resignation will allow Newbridge to heal and move forward," he stated. The news of Daniels' resignation rippled through Newbridge, sealing the community's desire to close this turbulent chapter and begin anew. For some, it was a clear victory. For others, it was a sobering reminder of the vigilance needed to maintain integrity within their leadership. In the weeks that followed, the community center project resumed with renewed vigor and community support. Elijah, seeing the fruits of his labor and the positive changes already taking place, felt a profound sense of accomplishment and responsibility. He worked tirelessly, ensuring that every step was transparent and inclusive, reinforcing the lessons learned from his ordeal. One afternoon, as the foundation for the new community center was being laid, Elijah stood at the construction site, watching as children from the local school came to see the progress. Their excitement and curiosity were palpable as they envisioned the place that would soon be a hub of learning and activity. Turning to his friend and ally, Mitchell, who had joined him at the site, Elijah shared a reflective moment. "Seeing these kids here today, I feel a weight has been lifted. They will grow up in a better Newbridge than we did, I hope." Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder, smiling. "They will, thanks to you, and this center will be a testament to what we can achieve when we stand up for what is right." Yet, even as they celebrated these achievements, Elijah knew that his work was far from over. The establishment of the community center was just the beginning. There were more projects, more opportunities for growth, and undoubtedly more challenges ahead. But now, armed with experience and surrounded by a community that trusted and supported him, Elijah was ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set over Newbridge, casting long shadows over the construction site, Elijah felt a mix of fatigue and exhilaration. He had fought against a tide of corruption and won, but the battle to maintain the integrity and welfare of his community was ongoing. With a final look at the bustling construction site, Elijah made his way home. Tonight, he would rest, but tomorrow, he would be back, building not just a building, but a future. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was filled with the promise of progress. And for Elijah Carter, that was all the motivation he needed to keep moving forward. This resolution, though satisfying, was not an end, but a beginning. A new chapter for Elijah and for Newbridge, marked by hope, vigilance, and an unyielding commitment to justice and community. As the Newbridge Community Center finally opened its doors, the sound of children's laughter mingled with the chatter of residents marked a new beginning for the town. Elijah Carter, standing amidst the crowd, watched as his vision materialized into the vibrant halls and rooms, bustling with activity. The journey to this point had been fraught with obstacles, each one an opportunity for Elijah to fortify his resolve and deepen his commitment to his community. His experience was a testament to the idea that individual resilience, when anchored in a cause greater than oneself, can effect significant change. From the onset of his project, Elijah faced systemic resistance that tested his character and resolve. His confrontation with Officer Daniels, which climaxed in the exposure of misuse of authority, was not just about a personal vendetta, but highlighted broader issues of governance and trust. These events underscored the pernicious effects of unchecked power and the subtle ways prejudice can permeate and destabilize a community. Elijah's journey from being a subject of suspicion to a celebrated community leader exemplified profound personal growth. The challenges he faced honed his leadership abilities and deepened his understanding of the intricate balance between authority and service. He learned that true leadership is not just about steering projects, but also about nurturing trust and advocating transparency. Moreover, Elijah's story was a microcosm of larger societal issues, echoing the struggles against systemic racism and corruption seen around the world. Newbridge became a small-scale demonstration of how community engagement and vigilance can confront and dismantle these deep-seated problems. The corruption exposed within the Newbridge Police Department served as a reminder of the vigilance needed to maintain justice and equity, particularly in smaller communities where such issues might otherwise go unnoticed. As Newbridge moved forward, so did Elijah, who continued to advocate for community-based governance and the empowerment of local voices. The community center, equipped with resources for education and personal development, stood as a beacon of progress and a testament to what could be achieved when a community united behind a cause. In his reflections, Elijah recognized the ripple effect of his actions. The reform initiatives prompted by his struggle encouraged other communities to scrutinize their institutions and seek greater accountability. His story had transcended the boundaries of Newbridge, inspiring others to challenge the status quo and to fight against the erosion of community values by hidden agendas. The broader implications of Elijah's journey resonate with an unmistakable call to action for the audience. They underscore the importance of individual agency within a collective framework. This story, while rooted in the specific context of Newbridge, serves as a universal reminder of the power of resilience and the impact of civic engagement. It is a call to every viewer or reader not merely to be observers of their environment, but to be active participants in shaping it. As the narrative of Newbridge and Elijah Carter closes, the message is clear. Challenges to justice and equity are omnipresent, but so are opportunities for reform and renewal. Each person holds the potential to effect change, however daunting the odds may seem. The story of Elijah is not just one of overcoming adversity, but also a testament to the enduring human spirit's capacity to foster hope and instigate change. In closing, let the story of Elijah Carter serve as a beacon of inspiration, a narrative that resonates with emotional depth and empowers each individual to consider how they, too, can contribute to fostering a just, transparent, and vibrant community. In the tapestry of life, each thread, each individual's actions and choices, strengthens the whole, weaving together a narrative of resilience, hope, and relentless pursuit of justice. As Elijah Carter looks to the future, his journey continues, and so does the story of every individual inspired by his legacy. Let us move forward with the determination that the challenges we face are not just obstacles, but stepping stones on the path to a more just and engaged society. As Elijah Carter stood outside the newly opened community center in Newbridge, the sound of children laughing and the hum of activity inside reminded him of how far he had come. The grand opening had been a momentous occasion, but to Elijah, it wasn't the culmination of his efforts. It was only a new chapter in a journey he had set out on years ago, long before the controversy over his community center, long before the challenges with Officer Daniels. For Elijah, This was the beginning of something much larger than himself. His path to this point had been difficult. The journey had tested his patience, his faith in his community, and most of all, his belief in the possibility of real change. Elijah had faced systemic racism and abuse of power from individuals who were supposed to protect and serve the community. But through it all, he had shown a resilience that not only propelled him forward, but also inspired those around him to believe in the possibility of a better Newbridge. The emotional and psychological toll of the past months had been enormous. The accusations, the smear campaigns, the blatant attempts to discredit him and his project, it had all taken a toll. But through these trials, Elijah had grown. He had learned that being a leader wasn't just about creating programs or making decisions. It was about setting an example, standing up for what was right when everything seemed to be stacked against you, and facing down the powerful forces that threatened to keep people from achieving their fullest potential. In the days following Officer Daniels' resignation, Elijah reflected on his own transformation. He had once been a man content to quietly shape his world through business, his focus entirely on the success of his tech company. But after the events of the past year, after facing down public humiliation and challenging a corrupt system, Elijah realized that his role in the community had always been more than just as a businessman. It was about being a voice for those who were ignored, a force for change in the face of institutional complacency. Elijah had become a symbol of the kind of leadership that was rooted in integrity, transparency, and justice. His actions proved that one person, no matter their background, could make a difference, especially when they were willing to risk everything for the greater good. Elijah had always known that Newbridge wasn't perfect. He had witnessed firsthand how systemic problems, racism, classism, and corruption, had stained the very fabric of the town. His struggle with Daniels had exposed these issues in stark light, revealing how deeply they ran. Yet it was not just Daniels who had been complicit. It was the system that allowed such behavior to flourish without accountability. As the truth came to light, it became apparent that Newbridge's problems weren't isolated to one man or one department. The entire system needed reform, and Elijah knew that even though his personal victory had been significant, it was just the first step in a much larger fight. By confronting the corruption head-on, Elijah had forced Newbridge to reckon with its systemic issues. The revelations from the investigation into Officer Daniels' actions had sparked a wave of support for broader reforms. The police department, shaken to its core by the exposure, began implementing policies aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. The town council, led by figures like Mitchell, started putting pressure on other institutions in Newbridge, demanding that they reflect the community's diverse values and needs. But the battle wasn't over. Elijah knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight. The prejudice, the corruption, and the systems that perpetuated them were deeply entrenched. Elijah's work was far from finished. He understood that the fight for justice was ongoing, and that it wasn't just about toppling one corrupt individual. It was about changing the way people thought about power, authority, and fairness. He had seen firsthand how deeply ingrained biases could shape the experiences of the community's most vulnerable members, and he knew that exposing this was only the beginning. The real work was in dismantling the systems that allowed such prejudice to thrive. Elijah's growth as a leader was not defined by his success in taking down Officer Daniels. Rather, it was defined by how he responded to the challenges that followed. His actions had shown that resilience doesn't come from defeating one enemy, but from standing up again and again in the face of adversity. In the face of opposition, Elijah learned the value of persistence, of making sure his voice was heard even when it felt like the world was against him. His ability to stay calm, to rely on evidence and logic, and to keep his focus on the greater goal had earned him respect, not just from those who already supported him, but from those who had once doubted him. In the weeks following the opening of the community center, Elijah continued to meet with local leaders, residents, and activists. He pushed for more reforms, advocating for policy changes that would ensure every voice in Newbridge was heard and respected. He worked alongside his allies, including Mitchell, to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. They knew that this community center was just a small part of the larger fight for equality, justice, and opportunity. For all Elijah's vision had grown beyond one project. It was about creating a legacy of empowerment where future generations could thrive without the constraints of prejudice and inequity. The broader implications of Elijah's struggle were not lost on the people of Newbridge. His story had become a call to action. It was a reminder that no matter how entrenched the systems of power might seem, change was possible if people stood together, held their leaders accountable, and fought for what was right. His victory had shown that it was not only about the fight, but about the courage to face those difficult moments when everything seemed to be falling apart. It was about the willingness to believe that a better future could be built through collective effort, even if that effort meant challenging the status quo. For the people of Newbridge, Elijah Carter had become a symbol of what it meant to stand firm against injustice. His strength, resilience, and unwavering commitment had inspired others to take action in their own communities. His example had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, progress was not only possible, it was inevitable if enough people were willing to take a stand. And yet, despite the progress, Elijah knew that the path ahead was uncertain. He had seen how quickly things could unravel when people became complacent or when systems of power grew too comfortable. But he also knew that the more people like him stood up, the more they built together, the stronger their community would become. Elijah was ready for whatever came next. His journey had not been about reaching a destination, but about the fight for what was right. He would continue to push forward, knowing that every small victory, every act of courage, brought them closer to the future they all deserved. As Elijah looked out over the community center, the laughter and voices of children filling the air, he smiled. His work was far from over, but he was no longer fighting alone. The community had awakened, and together, they would continue to build a future based on justice, equality, and hope. Elijah had not just built a community center. He had built the foundation for a new Newbridge, one where the voices of all its residents were valued, and where resilience, integrity, and collective action were the cornerstones of the community's strength. And as he moved forward, he knew that even in the face of setbacks, they would keep building, because the fight for justice never truly ends. It simply evolves, and Elijah would be ready to face it head-on, every step of the way.